Hello, welcome to Pod Maverick. Kirk, your enthusiasm. You all may be a bit confused as to why I didn't hit the pre-show music. Well, that's because I'm about to do it right now. Just 1 second.
What is this World of Warcraft music?
Welcome back. You can tell I'm rusty after 2 weeks not doing this. This is Kirk Henderson. I am joined by my friend Adam Mares of DNVR. Adam, how are you?
I'm great. People have to know. Can we take a behind the curtain?
Yes.
Kirk and I are friends. I would
Yes.
say good friends. We talk regularly. And he hits me up and is like, hey, man, you want to hop on a call sometime this week? Let's hop on a call. And I'm like, yeah, man, we'll catch up. We'll hop on a call. I didn't realize that meant a show.
Look, I'm going to go. No, the text message says, do you have 30 minutes this week? That's still my fault. Like, it's ultimately my fault is the answer that we're getting
I can't believe I interpreted this as friendship. I was like, heck yeah, man. Let's some fun.
Well, it's so funny. I'm actually glad you addressed that because it's like I talk about sports-ish with my friends all the time. All podcasts are televised or are video or tape conversations between friends. That's why overproduced bullshit never works. And so when you have real friends that you also want to make stuff with, it's sometimes you don't talk about things.
Yeah.
And so I've been you and our mutual friend Adam or Andrew Sharp. You went on their what's their
GOAT.
The GOAT, the Greatest of All Talk podcast, and did a really fantastic show. And I was so pissed because Andrew asked you like 3 things I was wanting to ask you. And then he just did it because he is a actual professional journalist and quite a really, like, he's a really good conversation mover.
Yeah.
Like, and anyway, I sat on my questions, I actually wrote them down. And then I did this really, really hard thing to do, which was not actually ask you any of those questions during any of our conversation.
Okay.
Which included meeting up with you at a bar in Dallas, which we did about 3 weeks ago. So that's fun. So anyway, guys, I know I've not done a show in a little while. Josh and I each ran into a series of unfortunate events. And because it's August and because I just wasn't in the mood to make chicken salad out of chicken shit, I decided to sit and I didn't want to do anything. And it's probably the last time I won't do anything until the Mavericks win the NBA Finals this coming June. Okay, so because I don't want to waste my dear friend's time, I'm going to hop right into it. So Adam is a guy who does a lot of everything. But recently, this last NBA season, he and his podcast partner, Tim Legler, managed to barge into my very heavy podcast rotation with perhaps it was yours and Jason Concepcion and Shay Serrano's new pod, which theirs is more infrequent than yours that barged into my show. Could you talk to me about what the initial vision was for that show when you guys set out, and then whether you think you've kind of hit that vision or has it changed into something else? Because as you well know, and you're not going to say this yourself, but I'll say it for you, it's like one of the best actual basketball shows in the podcast market.
I appreciate that, man. I really love it. And it starts up again in 2 weeks. Mavericks fans came to love it, over the course of the season because Legs was very early on the Mavs. He loved their trade deadline deals. And so he was very high, started predicting them to make the conference finals. And, I think Mavs fans kind of appreciated that and hopped on. But the idea for it was funny is we knew we were going to do a national show at All City and then, knew I was going to host it. And then we had a bunch of different things we were throwing out there. Like player, what if we bring on a player like Blake Griffin? I know was out there and kind of putting his name out there, wanting to do some stuff. Different types of people we were maybe thinking about pursuing. And I thought, for me personally, I just love talking hoops, and I like people that know hoops. And Legler was a diamond in plain sight. Like, he was a guy that everybody loves him on ESPN and on SportsCenter and on Scott Van Pelt show. So he was available. We knew it. And I was like, man, I'll bet you this guy. I didn't know he was going to be such a good storyteller and such a fun guy. He's always been such formal television. So I didn't know how he would be.
He weaves very well between like being an analyst and being a storyteller.
Man, he's honestly, he's been in media for almost 25 years. And it was one of those things where once we started potting together, immediately I was like, oh yeah, there's a reason this guy has stuck around for 2+ decades in media. He's really good. And yeah, it's fun, man. We just talk hoops. It's perfect chemistry, and we both love the game a lot. So it's awesome.
That's great, man. And for anybody that's listening that hasn't really given it a chance, if you listen to a heavy rotation of all Mavericks podcasts, I really recommend it, because what it gives me vibes of, I don't want to say his name, but there's been some NBA shows out there that when they first dip on the scene, the national scene, there's a lot of stuff you can talk about, a lot of analyst stuff, but it's really easy to sort of dip into story of the day, the thing that will get you clicks. But basketball is just sort of, it's not sort of, the NBA season is an absolute onslaught of slop sometimes, is the way I would phrase it. So, kind of with that in mind, understanding you have to talk about the NBA a whole lot. This is probably the longest. How long have you guys been off? For about 5-6 weeks now?
Yeah, about that. Maybe
so. Yeah, so this will be the longest break you get for the rest of the year.
Yeah,
and hopefully it's been a little bit of a time to recharge. With that in mind, what do you still like about the NBA right now?
That's such a good question, man. I still love the game. Like, for me, there's awesome texture to the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about the different personalities and trades and all this different stuff, but when that gets, for me, that expires for me. Like, there's only so much of that I can get into before I need a break, but I love the game. The game is so fascinating. It's constantly evolving. I like thinking about it strategically and trying to observe the different evolutions of the game. And so that's what I enjoy of it. And then I enjoy the great players, obviously, like everybody else. And I don't even just mean the greats, the Lukas, the Jokic's. I even love the great role players, people that really understand how they contribute to a team and then absolutely nail those contributions. So it's the closer you get to the actual game, there's so many different ways and lenses to look at it through that it just keeps you entertained.
Yeah, I really do enjoy seeing mid kind of that, like, that 8th, 7th, 8th, 9th man progression, guys that somehow develop a little more to their game. Watching how team cohesion happens, we're in the early part of the NFL season, and NFL passing is down to like really dark levels. It's like 193 yards a game. We're talking like,
what's going on?
And so, but at the beginning of the season, everything's a little bit rough.
Yeah.
And one of the things about basketball that's a little similar to this is, like, teams are not fully formed. There's a lot you can learn. There's a lot that coaches have to figure out, even with kind of veteran-laden teams. So I like watching whether guys can take leaps or whether they can figure out what their role actually is. We'll probably talk about the Mavericks a little later in the show, but like one guy with the Mavericks that I just don't know what his role is, like a guy like Jaden Hardy. He was a shockingly effective playoff spark plug who to this day, I don't know if I actually believe in. The answer is probably not, but does he have a role? Does he have a role at the Mavericks? I just sort of like thinking about that. Now, considering that, one of the things that we've talked about offline, and that is sort of a concern within the NBA community right now, and really with sports in general, is that to a degree, basketball has been solved. How the Boston Celtics just won seems to be like, I don't really think it's a replicatable blueprint, because I'm not sure it just seems really hard to find that much skill within the pay scales that the NBA has. But success breeds people copying it. So with that in mind, do you think there's anything that the NBA needs to do as far as, like, I don't know, rule changes or anything like that? Because we get often very uptight about changing the game. But I mean, look at the 3-point line. 3-point line changed the NBA. And now is it time years later to change it again?
Well, the game changes whether you change rules or not. I mean, people just try out new strategies. There's these restrictions in place, as you kind of alluded to, about how much you could spend on a roster. Boston is willing to spend an enormous amount on their roster, so they're able to build this team, but for how long? But I do think that the Celtics represent the latest evolution of the game, which is a lot of dribble drives and a lot of kickouts for catch and shoot. So you have 5 shooters. That's everything everybody kind of highlights on, is you have all of these shooters at all 5 positions. So that part feels obvious, but it's really the dribble drive. Like, their offensive game is just everybody has an opportunity to catch the ball and either shoot or catch the ball and just try to break down the defense and get into the paint and make something of it. And Derek White's great at it. Drew Holiday's great at it. Tatum and Brown are great at it. Even Peyton Pritchard's great at it. So they have a bunch of guys that can do that skill. And I think when you ask, is there something the NBA needs to do? I think other teams will find new formulas. Oklahoma City is copying that formula to some degree, but with different types of personnel. So I think there's stuff. It's not like inevitable the Celtics are going to win every single year.
No.
But if you're asking me about the pressures the league can put on, if they view, as I do, the Boston Celtics to be horribly boring to watch, and like we're talking about a 62-win team, and you think like usually a 62-win team, I was lucky to be alive to watch a 62-win team. That team is boring to watch, and part of me thinks that they are taking advantage of 2 things. One, 3-point shots are no longer difficult. Guys have really practiced them, and it's not as hard as it used to be to make threes. And then number 2, it's impossible with today's rules to guard the perimeter one-on-one. So if you can stretch it out and dribble drive, you can draw a lot of fouls. That's what they do. Driving is kind of the market inefficiency in the NBA, and they have 4 of them that can do it.
Yeah, it's so funny. I text you and complain about this. I complain to like everyone in my life that has any affiliation with like basketball or youth basketball about this. I'm getting my son involved in more basketball here in the Dallas area. And as I've gone to some of these great big gyms where I see coaches and players and young players training, there is so much emphasis on one-on-one play and individual dribble drive stuff. I want to lose my mind. Because I see it and it's like, well, you know, when you're 13, 14, you're not doing that. Like one player on a team might do it. Oh, you're going to drive across the lane and do a hezzy. But in the NBA, you know, that's what made the Celtics so kind of terrifying to deal with, because everything's open. Yeah. And I'm curious as to whether the skill level can actually get there. It probably can, because like you said, the shooting is just, you know, we used to think 36% was really good for an NBA shooter. And now it's, you kind of got to be 40%. Well, you know, four makes out of every 100 isn't that many, but it's enough to swing, you know, one more make a game often swings things. So it's pretty interesting to me. I sort of hope, I just hope they experiment with things. And, you know, the
NBA,
huh?
They being the NBA?
Yeah, because when they've been trying stuff in the G League, for example, but the G League pace of play might as well be a different sport. It's so crazy because the Mavericks will send guys down there that put up these gaudy stat lines. Then you look at what the number of possessions it's 35 more possessions. That's not NBA basketball. It's a different deal. And I'm not so married to the sanctity of the game, because I'm watching this to be entertained. Right. You know? And it's an entertainment product. And it feels like the NBA seems to be married to like odd traditions in some ways, and then very invested in making something out of whole cloth in other ways, like this in-season tournament where it's like, we promise it matters. And it's, I don't know, maybe if the in-season product, they've got to find way, and they're trying stuff, and they have, you know, with the back-to-backs, things like that. But like the actual rule changes, you know, I think the one that they made for the good of the game was right after Luka's 73-point explosion, where there had been all of those scoring outbursts. Yeah. They changed the way fouls were called. And I was really, really delighted that the league actually admitted to it.
Yeah, in stealth mode, but then admitted to it. Yeah.
Which is fine. You know, how often do you do something in a relationship where you kind of fib on the front and then on the back end, you're like,
okay, all right, yeah. I got to confess something that I did last month that I didn't tell you. No, I mean, here's the thing though. If we just we'll do a little logical experiment here. If we could admit that the NBA makes changes behind the scenes without telling anyone, and presumably without actually going through the proper channels, usually you talk to, you know, the board and the team will vote on it and all this stuff. But the NBA basically did that without telling anyone. It had a measurable impact on the way teams scored, and especially how individuals scored. So if we can admit that the NBA has the ability to sort of influence the game, what makes us think that we can't go one more step and thinks that the NBA can influence the outcome of the game? You could look around and say, okay, well, we're looking at a future where Giannis in Milwaukee is about to be really good and run the table. We don't want that. We want the Boston Celtics to be good. So let's move the scales in the direction of them. Again, I don't think that's what's happening. But when you say you like that they handled this in stealth, it's the one thing I would say is I don't really like that, because it does make me feel like they can manipulate the game in these small ways that have big repercussions. And like me personally, I love Jokic. I love physicality. I would take out hand checking. If I want to tilt things in my favor, I'm going to allow for more physicality. I'm going to try to slow the game down. I'm going to do different things that favor a lumbering big man. If the NBA realizes they can do that and is willing to do that, even if they have justified reasons for doing so, it's still weird for us to know of like, wow, is the game quite as free as we want to believe?
It's an interesting point. I'm glad that they admitted to it within the same season. I would have much rather that they put out a memo and said, look, we're tired of this stuff on February 1st. We're changing the way this is done. It took about 2 weeks until everybody caught on. The funny part to me that it happened after the Luka game is his game. He had something like 12 free throws. It was not a free throw. It was not a Joel Embiid special with 34 free throws or something like that. He just hit like a bajillion threes, and they decided to guard him one-on-one. It was pretty bad. I'm going to forget this question, so I'm going to ask you right now, even if it's very Mavs-centric as opposed to more NBA-focused. What do you make of the fact that even after the rules changed, Luka kept his scoring average up? I thought that was really interesting. Am I just being
is that true? I didn't know that. So his numbers did not dip at all post the rule changes. It's impressive. I'll tell you that. I would love to look around and see whose numbers dropped, like who had the biggest drop pre and post that. I wonder if
Embiid's didn't, because he kept getting bullshit calls, but we know this. We know this.
Yeah. It's interesting. Look, I think the rule change, allowing a little bit more physicality, Luka benefits. There's players like Luka, like Jokic, like LeBron, so supremely skilled that Luka could change up his game. And one of the things you can always look at is there are players that succeed in the NBA and then struggle at FIBA, and there's players that do well at both. Luka's obviously one that does well at both. They're different styles of basketball with different rules, but guess what? He can adjust on the fly. He doesn't need a year to adjust and, now there's no defensive 3 seconds. How do I adjust? He's talented enough to be like, this is how this game is played. I'll adjust my game. So I'm not necessarily surprised that you can allow more physicality. Okay, I'll use that to my advantage then.
I like it. Okay, now I asked you this question in the email. I only gave you about 10 minutes to prepare. And
I didn't even look at it.
You didn't even look at it. Okay, so this is going to be even better. So I've been sort of thinking about I'm very into fantasy football. I just can't help myself. It's the only form of gambling that I really get into. And I latch on to particular guys. And I'm like, this is my dude. So I'm curious is if I'm putting you on the spot here, give me 5 guys. Does not matter. I'm not asking for superstar. I'm asking 5 guys that Adam Mares is really interested in going into the 24-25 NBA season.
I'll give you one. I'll start from one from your team, and that's Quinton Grimes. Ooh. I'm a huge Quinton Grimes guy. I love him. I'm worried about his health, right? He's a guy that you always just wonder, is he going to hold up? But in terms of like how he plays like a dog. That guy plays with insane energy. He has a pretty good looking shot and the confidence to take it. And I think he's actually has the tools to be a pretty good defender. Like I said, offensively, there's a package there, shooting, a little bit of ball handling. I love that mold of player. So for me, he's a guy that I look at coming over and I go, I think he's the same as Josh Green, but better. He's like a better version of that to me. So he's a guy. And then I think it's a good spot for him. I do think that he needs the green light. And I actually like when players, it's an underrated thing of the NBA, that when players don't have a green light or the trust of their team or coach, they just shoot worse. It's just a thing. And he is a guy that I think if he gets a green light and is allowed to play a little freely, which I'm not sure is going to happen in that Mavs system, playing with Luka and playing with Kyrie. But if he is, I think he's going to have a great year. And that's one of the reasons. So he's definitely on my list of guys I'm most intrigued by this year.
Okay, that's one. Let's think of some others. I'm gonna throw one. God, I should have done this for myself, but
I mean, I have a million. I could keep going if you need.
No, give me your top 5 that are just on top of mind, like those dudes that exist.
Well, I like Ben Shepherd. He's another guy that's a little under the radar. Indiana. I mean, look at not too dissimilar from Quinton Grimes, right? Like a dog defensively.
Yeah,
stands in the corner, knocks down his threes. Stays within his lane. Another trait I like. We're talking about role players that I really like. He's a role player that's a high level one of these guys. So he would definitely be on my list. You know, I'm a Hartenstein guy. I don't know if we've talked about that, but I mean, he's not like under the radar, but I think he's a guy that Mark Dagnott is a great coach because I think he understands what his players are good at and is good at fitting them into a general team system of, okay, you do this well. Here's how we adapt to fit you into what we do. I think Hartenstein's going to have a monster year because I think he has a lot of talent. And I think Dagnott is going to be like, okay, let's put him in the best positions for himself.
That's a really good one because the Ben Shepherd's a fun one in the sense that when you hear the name Ben Shepherd, what comes to mind is like a 2K creative player. Like that's not a real person's name.
It does sound like it, yeah.
But Hartenstein is a guy that Mavericks fans clamored for about 3 years ago. And it's really surprising. Really? He was the biggest. His free agent deal might be one of the biggest, honest to goodness, true free agent deals I think that the Thunder have ever signed a player to. Like his deal is enormous, but he solves some interesting problems for them because the Mavericks, you know, this it's so odd. Oklahoma City fans tend to behave like they won that series instead of losing it 4-2 because their team is amazing. They just happened to lose. And look, right. I've watched the Mavericks with Dirk for, you know, when they were good for 12 years, that happened to Dirk's teams plenty of times. But Hartenstein is the kind of guy that solves some specific problems for them in terms of just rebounding and toughness. And I'm very fascinated to see just how many wins that team could get. I sort of made an audacious comment today where I feel like they could be the best regular season team since the 73-win Warriors. And that includes... Yeah, and that includes the Celtics. I think the West might be a little too hard for that to actually come to pass. But look, like they had 8 or 9 guys play 70 plus games. That's going to happen again. And somebody tried arguing, and our one of our friends was telling me, it's like, Kirk, you know, they're young. That's why they stay healthy. The problem is most young teams stay healthy. You never notice it though, because they usually suck. And this team is just, you know, they just have just a lot of things working in their advantage. He's a really good ad. And I just can't wait till the Mavericks play the Thunder again. That's going to be a fun one. 2 more.
It's going to be harder. It's going to be harder this next time. I'll go with Bones Highland. He's a guy that I think he's another one. Obviously was in Denver and is really good. He very immature, had a lot of growing up to do. Not sure he actually did that growing up, but he's a guy that I just think is so supremely talented. He has 30-point potential. He might have a chance. He's like fighting with Chris Dunn, who I also like for backup minutes out there with the Clippers. But I think he should win that battle personally. And I think most people would pencil in Dunn to win that one. But Bones Highland is a guy that I look at to either get minutes on the Clippers and people be kind of be like, holy crap, he had how many points tonight? Or a guy that gets traded. And then I'll be very curious to see what team takes a flyer on him because he's a really good player.
That's a really interesting one because Bones Highland has had... He's had an interesting career. You know, he's had the interesting and kind of very depressing draft story. He was a brief kind of fan favorite in Denver. And then the scuttlebutt seems to be that Denver sent him packing with the full blessing of everyone on the team. Right. And he's playing for this Clippers team, which is, you have to be a basketball diehard to be interested in this Clippers team. And I wonder if, particularly if Kawhi just really, if he just doesn't play, that makes that makes them a much more, some roles will be clarified if that's the case out there. All right, last one for you.
And I'm going to go with a Houston Rocket here, and I'm torn between 2. I'd either want to go with, I want to go with Tari Eason, but instead I'm going to go with Cam Whitmore.
Okay.
They're both to me in a similar spot in that they're really freaking good and kind of under the radar for how good they are. They have so much talent there in Houston. I don't even know how much both of those guys will play, but Cam Whitmore to me represents a guy that when I watch him, there are just moments. He had a stretch like somewhere, I think it was in late January, early February, where every night he kind of looked like an all-star, a future all-star as a rookie this year. So Cam Whitmore, Tari Eason also looks really intriguing to me, but I'm going to go with Cam Whitmore because he's a guy that I would not be surprised if he was one of the guys that climbed several spots, in the coming year and a half, if we're talking about him as one of these top young guys. So he's an interesting
guy. And he hung out there on the draft board for a real long time due to what seems like the Kentucky Wildcats tanking their own players' value, which is beyond fascinating. And he's man, at Summer League, he looked like an Uberman among children. Like, it was not a thing. Tari Eason is a fun one. This is a live show. You need to stop. It's my favorite. My child just walked in here a couple nights ago, or not, but maybe it was like 3 weeks ago when I was on. He just didn't care. He's like, Dad, I need you. I'm like, buddy, we just talked about them on the show. Whatever. Tari Eason is a guy that before the Mavericks leveled up, I really desperately wanted, because he strikes me as a connecting piece that can fit on many teams. Yeah. I just connecting piece players are so interesting to me, because there's guys that really seem to know what they are, like know what they want to be regardless of what their actual skill set is. And then guys who can blend to fit the mold. That was what I always wanted to be. I was like, I just want to help. And those guys I think are much rarer in the NBA than you might think. So, yeah. Okay, so
I got that list. Was that like a hipster list? I think that's what you were going for, right?
Well, I mean, look, like there's the season is so long, and so several, maybe it was after the Nuggets won the championship where you were kind of you and I were talking, and you're like, man, I already know what the NBA regular season is. We got to find other things to delve into, and like that's where it's like, all right, what else am I going to be watched for? I mean, the Rockets, like. The Western Conference is just unfair. Like, we need to redistribute some of this talent to the Eastern Conference. All right, so a couple of Mavs questions, and then I'll let you get out of Dodge. So with regards to their offseason, just an overarching thought. Do you think the Mavericks improved, or do you think they stayed about the same level with their free agency changes?
I think they stayed about the same level, but that level was good enough to get them to the NBA Finals. So it's like a good level. Klay Thompson could obviously prove me wrong if he has more left to give than I'm sort of giving him credit for. I think his year last year was maybe slightly underrated because the bad parts of it were so high profile. That being said, Derrick Jones Jr. to me represented some versatility that I think was actually very useful for them and how they ran offense and defense, actually. So I think they'll miss him a little bit. I don't want to say lucky breaks, but I am curious, like, what Exum looks like this year. I loved him, obviously, last year coming over from Partizan. Is he going to be as impactful now, a second year? I do think you're going to see it. The one guy that I think you're going to see a major upgrade from is Lively. But how much of an upgrade? Bigs tend to develop maybe a little bit slower.
And he improved. He improved so much more than I think. When you got Wembanyama out there as sort of a bar, he's already bent the curve beyond anything normal. I try to explain this to people in my life that are more casual. What Derek Lively did is hasn't been done in 15 years kind of thing. Like, you remember Jokic rookie year? It wasn't, he had some spots. I mean, you had seen him as a rookie and you were super into him. You could see the things, but it's the rapid development. I mean, we saw him Lively at Summer League, and I remember saying, I was like, I'm just going to be happy if this guy can set a screen by the middle of the year. And then he's out there, I was a little uncomfortable with the comments he made about Rudy Gobert until somebody reminded me that he didn't miss a shot against the Minnesota Timberwolves. Like, he was off his rock. So it's the other guy that I'm really interested to see how he fits. You mentioned Grimes already. I'm very interested to see what Naji Marshall brings to the table. Yeah. The Pelicans fans and friends that I have seem to be, when a guy leaves, you normally get dirty laundry, or it's like, that guy's he's right. There, like a couple of people I talked to say, like, look, he's a dog. He's going to bring something to the table that you guys were missing at spots last year. And so I think with again, the length of the NBA regular season, Luka's going to miss 10 games. Kyrie's going to miss 25 to 30. I'm more interested in where I think they're going to be better is at least record-wise. They finished at 50-32. They need to win more regular season games. They can't constantly be, they made it to the conference finals and the NBA finals on the bottom half of the bracket. Yeah. That's not that at a certain point your luck runs dry. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. So Naji Marshall is an interesting one. I think A lot of it is going to come down to shooting because I don't think he's a great shooter. I never watched him shoot and thought he was a good shooter, and he shot well last year. So is that just a lucky year, so to speak, or is there something to it that he's developing?
And that's where the Luka Doncic shot quality effort comes into things, because he just gets guys shots that are open.
Yeah, but some guys are better at those than others. Like some guys, you know, I mean, and I don't know, Naji Marshall to me would be a low volume guy. I think he's more like, he should be a catch and shoot guy.
2-3 a game, maybe something like that.
And also, like, I'd be surprised if he was a guy that was less comfortable in that system. He's a guy that seems like he would be more comfortable. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like Naji Marshall, I feel like I have a good sense of who he is, and I'm with you. A lot of Pelicans fans really rave about him, and it's one of those ones where it's like, okay, I like him, but I don't know if he's going to move the needle. And I certainly don't know if he's going to be able to replace some of the stuff Derek Jones Jr. did, which was when you have Luka Doncic, you want to run pick and roll.
Yep.
And you want as many options to run pick and roll as you can, so people can't hide their center or their worst pick and roll defender on a guy. And Derek Jones Jr. allowed that. You have Lively. Well, if Jokic is not guarding Lively because, hey, okay, that's a tough matchup, whatever, I'll just guard so-and-so other player. And with Derek Jones Jr., there was a lot of things that Dallas could do to sort of like make it so, okay, you're going to do that. We're going to run 1-3 pick and roll or 1-4 pick and roll. And I don't know that you're going to do that with Naji Marshall. Like he's not I don't know if he's the kind of guy to do that. So he has other strengths, but that was one that I think really unlocked Dallas.
Well, I actually agree with you where I've asked questions about the vertical element that Derek Jones Jr. brought along with Gafford and Lively, and was told by I'll just go ahead and say it because it doesn't, the DLLS's Bobby Caralla actually said, the Mavericks never ran plays for him.
Right.
Got dunks.
Yeah.
But and I understand that, but it's like the getting of the dunk and the ability to do some of those things, it matters over the course of the season. I don't know. I tell you what, though, coming off an NBA Finals run with these Dallas Mavericks, you would think that the team would be a little bit boring. Okay, you know what to expect. They changed out just enough pieces to where, and they kept the assistant coach, the redheaded guy. I'm really interested to see what the team does, because as you know, Jason Kidd has frustrated me. He has played sub 500 basketball all three of the Mavericks seasons in kind of November, December, January, and then they play like above 60% win rate in the other months. And so I need these Mavericks to sort of piece it together earlier and not need to go on long win streaks in order to make a difference. So,
yeah, we'll see, man. I think they're in a tough spot because oftentimes I think there's a sense of they're climbing, right? They made it to the finals and now next year. And it's just, I think that we're done with those days. I just think the West is one of these things where every year it resets and there's 4 or 5 teams that could come out of it and they all sort of have an equal chance at it. And to go twice in a row is going to be really, really, really tough.
Oh yeah. No, and it doesn't, the one stat that continues to blow my mind is that Jason Kidd has as many series wins as Rick Carlisle did in his entire Dallas Mavericks career.
That's crazy. Is the fan base warming up to Jason Kidd?
I think there's some begrudging acceptance, and that comes from people like me too, that like, I still don't know if Jason Kidd is a great X's and O's coach. But I do know that he has a staff that seems to excel in particular areas. And he managed to keep Kyrie Irving on track for an entire year, which hasn't been done since he was on a team with LeBron James. Like I can't ignore the people management element of this. And that's where if there's something to be believed about the Klay Thompson of it all, because Klay is by all accounts kind of a low-key diva.
Yeah.
That's where I have a little bit of hope, because if it's too long, Klay might still have a shot, but he's not the guy. He's a part now. So I will say begrudging acceptance should be a segment on this very podcast. I think that would be a nice, like, the Mavs won. What is Kirk going to begrudging acceptance corner with Kirk? Well, see, there's not as many people in the chat right now, but during the season, look, I was a happy motherfucker. Okay. Like it was a wild season for me. I was on here. We had our baby November 2nd. So I was on here around like game 10 with a child on my shoulder in game. And then the Mavericks, that's fun. I am working my way back into basketball season. I have kept you 5 minutes longer than I said I would. Guys, this has been...
You told me we were talking on the phone. I didn't even know we were
I did not say the phone. Go check your messages. Is this better or worse, or the time I crunched ice on one of your podcast episodes? Oh God. All right, guys, this has been Kirk Henderson and Adam Mares of DNVR and the All Cities Network. Josh and I are actually going to try to record this week. We will see what's going on. Thank you so much for being patient with me. And thank you guys. So we got 3 different people. Shout out to Ozzy D, my man Henry, and my man Cowboy for some tips here during the off season. This is how we keep the lights on. That's pretty fantastic. Really appreciate you guys' constant support of the show. Really looking forward to getting things going again this season. And I promise I will actually host an interactive live show at some point. My brain is just I've not been able to deal with things for the last couple of weeks. All right, guys, Kirk Henderson and Adam Mares. I will see you guys a little later in the week. Go Mavs.